All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Grant Messner. This is Colin Sen. And today we're doing Trainer Talk episode 7. We're going to be talking about the big 3 exercises, the squat, bench, and deadlift, why they're important, and how you should work them into your program. So, Colin, how you doing today, bro?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Doing good, man. Doing good. Just hit some squats this morning, actually. So very timely that we're going to be talking about this today. I know you're a big Colin's a big 3 guy as well, big squatter.
What's the best exercise ever? I love it.
It's a good exercise. It's one that I think nobody really likes to do, but it's one that I think is very good for developing lower body strength. So anyway, first let's maybe just to spend a little bit of time talking about why you should do the big 3, and why they're kind of important, because I think there's kind of some at least like on Twitter and like maybe on other social media platforms, I'm sure, but it's kind of the old debate of like, should you be doing free weights? Should you be doing machines? And kind of the benefits and drawbacks of some of these. In my opinion, a lot of it is very dependent on your goals, but I do think a lot of people, even if your goal is like traditional like bodybuilding, right? Like I think a lot of people benefit from doing heavy barbell based movements, at least as part of their training, even if you're not going to necessarily do it every single week or focus all of your time and effort there. I still think a lot of people can benefit. Would you agree,
Yeah,
Colin? Sorry,
I think
can't
most
talk.
people definitely benefit a lot from having the big 3 programmed in,
Yeah,
whether that's going heavy or not with it. They'll
yeah,
have a lot of benefit from doing it.
yeah, 100%. Yeah, and I think even if your goal is not to be a power lifter, which for those of you who don't know out there, powerlifting, the sport of powerlifting is, you're going to do 3 reps of squat, 3 reps of bench, and 3 reps of deadlift, and just take the max of each of those 3, and then that's your total. And your goal is to produce the highest total that you possibly can in a competition. So that's the sport of powerlifting. But even if you don't compete in powerlifting, a lot of people will still benefit from this. So, like, one example, like I played. They're great for a lot of athletes. They're great for bodybuilding. They're great for just general health and performance. Like when I played baseball in college, we did all the big 3 as part of our as a very core part of our training as well. So, but I think like maybe we can just talk a little bit about some of the benefits, and why they're important. I think the biggest one that I see, I mean, there's a few, but one of the biggest ones that I see is the fact that the big 3, they essentially, but when I say compound movement, right, that's going to be a movement that's going to involve multiple muscle groups working together at once in order to accomplish a task, whether that's doing a squat, a deadlift. There are other compound movements that aren't necessarily like big 3 exercises. Like I would consider standing overhead press a compound movement. I would consider like an RDL or a reverse lunge a compound movement. So there's other compound movements, but compound movements in general, I think are, it's great at kind of teaching your body to move in an athletic way, in a very functional way. Like that's kind of the idea of functional training. But I would say the functional aspect of it is one that I think is very important, because whether your goal is to play a sport, whether your goal is to just move and live healthy and injury free, that's you really can't go wrong with that. So I think that's one of the biggest benefits for sure.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, especially like in terms of basketball, I mean, I've seen a lot of like more
Yeah.
professional athletes. They may not do a full deep squat, but they might train that quarter squat to initiate the jump, or whenever they're
Yep.
doing anything that involves just a quarter of a dip down on your legs. I see a lot of that in more training compared to a heavy single or something.
True. True. Yeah, 100%. And it really depends on your goals. Another one kind of in line with that, with training for athleticism, Colin, is when I was in college, we did a lot of speed deadlifts, or speed variations of these, with the intent of developing, explosive power. So like when I was a college pitcher, developing explosive posterior chain strength. Obviously, there's a lot of carryover from that, from the weight room to getting on a mound and throwing a pitch as fast as you can. So that was one that we trained a ton. Were speed deadlifts and kind of speed movements in general, but also like partials, heavy partials. Those also have their place in athletic training as well.
Yeah.
Cool. Cool. Another big benefit that I see from them are, and this is applicable honestly, especially if you're somebody on a time crunch who you don't have tons and tons of time for the gym, which, a lot of my clients are kind of in that boat where they're working a busy job. They don't always have a ton of time to be spending hours and hours at the gym. So the fact that the big three and compound movements as a whole, they really work multiple muscle groups at once, right? So, for example, I'll go through, like, think about like a deadlift, for example, right? Like, it's going to train your glutes, your hamstrings, spinal erectors, traps a little bit. It's going to really hit kind of all the muscles in your posterior chain, versus if you're just doing something like a lat pull down, for example, right? Because mainly just going to work your lats and actually your biceps a little bit too, but mainly just your lats. And it's not really going to target any of those other muscle groups. And I'm not here trying to bash lat pull downs. I do a ton of lat pull downs. I think they're great. But it's more just understanding kind of the deadlift as a tool, or the squat as a tool, and kind of what it brings to the table and what it does, versus understanding what a machine based workout would tend to do, and just kind of being aware of that and using that information to kind of build your training program appropriately.
I mean, especially in terms of them being a compound movement, so using the multiple muscle groups. And I know a lot of people, they want to be stronger. And so understanding where each part of the lift you fail at. So for a bench as an example, if you fail halfway up on the rep and you just can't seem to lock it out, then we can know, okay, this is a tricep issue and your triceps are weak compared to the rest of the bench.
Exactly.
So, program a little bit more triceps, get your triceps a little bit stronger to help you with that lockout position.
100%. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's a big one, especially for powerlifting too. Like, one that I've been doing recently on deadlifts is heavy, like pause reps. I call them like high pause reps, where I'll pause, not like, if you've ever seen pause deadlifts before, a lot of times people pause like maybe an inch or so off the ground. I'll actually pull the bar almost to lockout. And then I'll pause there because I have been struggling with my lockout and finishing that part of the movement. So, the beautiful part of these compound movements is, like Colin said, they're working multiple muscle groups at once. And so you can kind of see, okay, if you're struggling at a particular part of the lift, you can kind of break down, okay, like what are the actual deficiencies? Like how should I actually address this with my programming? Cool. Those to me are kind of the biggest benefits of it. But I'm sure there are definitely others. Colin, I don't know if there's any other that you wanted to highlight, but to me, those kind of cover a lot of why I do compound movements.
Yeah, I think definitely like the time crunch and figuring out where the weak parts are of your body are definitely two of the biggest points that people should realize when they're trying to do a compound movement.
100%. Yeah. And yeah, I really think maybe not everybody, I shouldn't make a blanket statement that everybody should be doing them, but a large percentage of people should be. And as long as, you have the correct technique and the correct form, these are actually going to be, this is potentially maybe even another benefit of them. When you're doing them with the correct form, they can actually be, they can build your body and make it more resilient to injury, right? Like, I think a lot of people get worried about deadlifts and they think, oh, this is going to mess up your back or whatever. But actually, like, when you're deadlifting with the proper form, like, progressing the weight heavier is actually making your back more resilient to injury. Like, how many people, say, like, in their 50s and 60s, especially like as you get older, like, oh, like, I have back pain, whatever. A lot of times, if you're taking the time to strengthen those muscles and teach them how to move in an efficient manner, you're actually going to kind of preemptively get rid of a lot of those injuries that you would have otherwise kind of came across. So the next thing I want to kind of do today is just kind of go through each of these lifts and kind of talk about some common, like, technique tips and kind of where people get a little bit stuck. So maybe we start with the squat here, Colin.
Yeah, I'll definitely talk about squat first here.
Yeah. Cool. So squats, I think there's a few things to kind of mention with them. The biggest one off the top of my head is just like making sure making sure you're set up and everything, like you're set up in a good kind of position to succeed. So whether you want to do high bar or low bar, that choice is kind of up to you. I think, in my opinion, I actually transitioned to low bar recently, and I've really been liking it. Low bar is basically just that's just basically referring to where the bar kind of sits on your shoulders. But whether you do high bar or low bar, high bar would be maybe more on your upper traps. Low bar would be kind of more like middle of your shoulder blade. Whichever way you do it, you want to make sure you're creating a lot of tension. Like one of the kind of biggest things I see beginners struggle with, especially, is like, they're just really loose with their squat setup. And so it makes it tougher to kind of have anything to drive against. Out of the hole, the bar is going to kind of move around more easily when you're down there. All of these are things that you do not want. So you basically want to really want to pinch your shoulder blades. I don't know if you guys can see me on the camera right now. Really want to pinch your shoulder blades together and create just a firm shelf where the bar is just going to sit and not move. And you do that, that's going to really make your squat, just kind of set your squat up for success. And then another huge mistake I see beginners doing on the squat a lot is just like the kind of knees going too far forward and kind of, maybe even coming up on your toes a little bit on the squat. In reality, guys, like you should think of the squat as the bar just moving on a completely vertical plane, right? Like it should start right over your center of mass, right over the middle of your foot. And as you go down, you take your breath in, you bracing your core. That's another mistake we could talk about. Maybe, Colin, maybe you could talk about bracing your core after I'm done with this one, but making sure that you're not kind of allowing your momentum to drift either too far forward or even too far back. But I would say falling forward is kind of the more common one that I see with beginners. Reason being, if you're kind of deviating the bar from that center of mass, from that kind of that vertical plane there, you're going to lose a lot of the efficiency of the movement. It's going to be not only harder for you to do as much weight, but also harder for you to grow the muscles and easier for you to get injured. So making sure you're keeping the bar, making sure you're kind of keeping the bar on that vertical plane is really important.
Yeah. Going back to your first point of staying strong with your shoulder blades tight, one thing that I've noticed that a lot of beginners is they'll have a wide hand grip. So the hands will be a lot wider out, usually around one of the two rings, smooth rings on the end of it, versus when they put them closer together, like practically right outside their shoulder blades.
Yeah.
It's a lot harder to lose that positioning and lose that strength when they stay close, stay tight together.
Absolutely. And this is kind of a high bar versus low bar thing for me too, right? Like high bar, you're going to want to have the hands a little bit closer together, versus low bar, kind of in order to even get into the low bar position, you're going to have the hands a little bit wider, such that you can kind of still create that same tension, but have the bar be lowered on your back, if that makes sense. So yeah, those are two pretty big common squat mistakes I see a lot of. I would also say bracing your core. So before every rep, this is something that I think it's an important concept for beginners to learn. You can kind of think of your core as like a can of Coke or something, right? Where an unbraced core would be like, imagine stepping on a can of Coke with nothing in it. It just breaks. It would just crunch and fall over. Versus stepping on a can of Coke that's filled with Coca-Cola, right? The second one, you're not even going to be able to like break it because it's braced, right? That's what the braced core is like. So when you brace, and you want to make sure you maintain that brace throughout the entirety of the movement. So breathe in. That's why you'll see like powerlifters when they're doing this, they take a big breath in, hold that, and then they complete the movement, and then kind of maybe at the very top they start to exhale again. So
yeah, I mean, especially with bracing, one of the biggest faults I see is like they will hold their breath the entire set during their brace versus being able to hold that brace. And I learned, this is the way I learned it, and I noticed a lot of people learn it, is you want to squeeze your stomach like you're taking a shit.
Yeah, that's a really good way to think about it.
We all do it. So like whenever you're, taking a shit, you're having your stomach squeezed tight, your ribs are pulled down a little bit, and you're in that athletic position, holding that, but you're still able to breathe, is a huge part for most people failing with their bracing.
It's true. No, that's actually a really good way to think about it. And I think to your point too, Colin, like when I say, you're going to hold your breath for the full rep, that's just for that one rep. You do that for the one rep. And then at the top, you take another second, breathe in, and then you complete your next rep. It's really important to not, if you're holding your breath for the entire time, that sounds like just a miserable experience. I think you're going to either get hurt or like pass out due to lack of oxygen, or maybe both. So don't do that. Make sure you're breathing, resetting your bracing between each set or between each rep. Cool. Any other kind of common faults you can think of off the top of your head, Colin? I think those are pretty common ones that a lot of people struggle with.
I mean, one of the big ones, I mean, you talked about it, is the foot positioning, or people coming up off their heels, or they might hear keep your heels back, and so they think all the weight needs to be shifted back. When in reality, your foot should be like a tripod. It should have your big toe, your pinky toe, and your heel are all acting as the three braces of support. That's ultimately, like, you're not just going up and down, you're going to push the ground away from you.
Yeah. That's a good way of describing it. Yeah, foot positioning. I think another one is sometimes like the kind of starting foot position is one people struggle with. It really depends on kind of what your goals are. I know some powerlifters tend to squat with their feet very wide, and that will allow you to do a little bit more weight. But for most people kind of training more for athletics or just kind of general performance, a little bit of a narrower stance, like roughly shoulder width, and feet, maybe roughly turned out 15-20 degrees from the zero line here, is kind of a good place to start with that. Another common fault that I just remembered as well is like the kind of the chest positioning. So obviously you don't want to be just like completely dumping your chest forward, but I think a lot of people have the misconception that you need to squat with your chest completely vertical at all times. And if you're if you're training like for power or for bodybuilding, and you really just want to hammer your quads, that can be a way to squat. But for most people, like allowing actually a little bit of movement, allowing that chest angle to change a little bit is completely okay, and it's just kind of part of the natural movement. Like I said, right, like having the bar on that completely vertical plane. If you're doing that, in order to accomplish that, your chest angle will have to change in order to, just based on the physics of it, that will have to happen. So
yeah, one of the things is people that either stay too vertical or they let their entire chest cave in. One of the things that helps the caving in too much part is if you tell them to keep their chest proud, like stay proud, keep their chest up, pinching their shoulder blades is going to be hard to, lose that chest. So keeping your chest proud. And one of my weights coach, my freshman year of high school, said, pretend like you're going to show your tits to people in that bottom squat. And so that's what forced people to keep your chest proud, keep you, showing off your knockers is what he told me.
100%.
Thinking about this, what I think about it, this guy should not have been telling this to a 14-year-old like that. But it's stuck and it worked. So
that's funny. Show off your knockers. That's funny. I like that. Another kind of building off that though, Colin, another one you can kind of use to help with that if you're somebody struggling with this is working in pause squats, and those kind of variations as well, because where you pause for 2-3 seconds at the bottom really forces you to be cognizant of that chest position. Pause squats, or another variation I've done is like a controlled concentric part, right, where you do like a 5-second eccentric, a 5-second concentric, like that can really and do this with lighter weight guys than like your normal kind of squat max or what you normally work with. Like I take about a plate off from where I normally would be on squats when I'm doing these movements. So but really focusing on the technique and the form there is going to go a long way for you. Sweet. Should we move on to bench? I think so.
I hate to say it, the 10 minutes per one was we spent 20 minutes on that.
I don't think so. We spent time kind of talking about why the big three are important too. So
yeah,
that's probably
but I mean we can move on to bench or bench or deadlift.
Let's talk bench.
Fucking hate bench press.
Oh
God, it's the worst.
That's funny that you hate bench press. Well, I actually do enjoy bench press quite a bit, so I want to spend some time talking about it.
You're crazy.
Bench press. So the bench press is this is like the classic gym bro exercise. When somebody asks you how strong you are, they'll probably ask you how much your bench press is. So it's important to make sure you understand and you're able to do it correctly. So with the bench press, there's a few things that kind of go into the setup. And again, kind of similar to the squat, and I guess similar to all the lifts, when you nail the setup, it puts you in a much better position to, kind of nail the rest of the lift as well. So with the bench press, right? One of the kind of the best cues that I've heard, there's a few things that to note in your setup position, right? First of all, you really want to make sure you're driving your shoulders into the bench and like really engaging your lats from the beginning, right? Having that kind of firm base to push against, because that's ultimately, right, like that's where the bar is going to be kind of centered over, that's where you're going to be pushing from. Having that more firm base to bench from is really going to go a long way for you. Also, like firmly rooting your feet in the grounds, ideally you can kind of create a little bit of an arch where your feet are on the ground and you're just driving through the floor. With it's a little bit to just kind of just describe this in words other than like kind of having like an actual picture or something to look at. But like I guess like kind of trying to tuck your feet more towards the back of the bench than your knees and just driving off of that, trying to keep your butt as best you can on the bench, as well as that kind of upper back kind of shoulder lat region that we just talked about. And just really kind of driving from that base. Because I think that obviously the bench is an upper body lift, but people make the mistake that the lower body is not involved at all, and that's just simply not true. It's very active. So
Yeah. And especially with the bench, one of the big things is the hand positioning.
yes,
So the wider you go, the easier it'll become simply because you're not having to go down as far. But
yeah,
the wider you go, the more front delt slash shoulder that you're having to use versus a close grip. You're going to use a lot more triceps because the halfway point is going to be a lot higher up. So you have to straighten out your arms a lot later. So you're having to use a lot more of your triceps there versus
yeah,
using your front delt. And that's going to be person to person. There is
yeah.
no, perfect grip. I mean, I like mine a little bit wider because my triceps are weak compared to my shoulders. But
Interesting.
I know some people like it,
I'm
right
I'm like
outside
the
their
opposite,
body.
honestly. Yeah, no, that's very interesting that you say that. I'm almost the exact opposite. I'm much more triceps dominant. Like I have my grip, not like close grip by any means, but definitely, if you think of like kind of the beginning of the knurling, right? I have probably about a thumb width away on each side, whereas some people are already out kind of by the rings and they're kind of gripping those actively. Um, I'm sure if I kind of grew up and started benching that way, then my shoulders would be my front delts would be a lot more would be stronger probably relative to my triceps and my pecs. But I kind of just grew up benching a different way, and so it essentially made it so that my triceps were a little bit stronger. But again, to Colin's point, there's no one right or wrong way to bench. I think it's just a matter of really understanding especially if you're trying to like target a certain muscle group very explicitly, understanding like which kind of grip is going to contribute to that. So for example, actually to your point, Colin, about the wider kind of being more of a mechanically efficient move, I've actually started training like really wide grip bench press, like with my entire hand almost like outside of the rings on the bar, just for the sake of working on that and developing that front delts and pec strength a little bit relative to my triceps, which are kind of naturally a little bit stronger.
It's going to be person to person, and depending on what your goals are and what you are
Yeah,
weaker in, is going to vary. And
100%.
it's just different for you and different for
Yeah,
me, and it's going to be different for whoever's listening to this as well.
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think the biggest thing, the other big thing with bench, so like hand positioning is important. Another one that's really important is just like the kind of mechanics of the actual press. So what I always tell people is like try to like bend the bar. And by bend the bar, there's a few different ways. When I say bend, I mean I'm trying to think of how to describe it. Like trying to take the edges of the bar, trying to like take those towards your feet or towards your knees, right? And when you do that, you might be wondering like why would you think to do that? The reason why is because that is going to lock your elbow angle and your shoulder angle and like kind of all these angles in place so that you can just press and have it be as one dimensional of a movement as possible. That's kind of I mean, you could argue that you're trying to do kind of similar tasks with all of these movements, but with bench press specifically, right? You don't want your angle of you don't want your shoulder angle relative to your chest to be changing during the movement, right? If that happens, then bad. And it's actually, believe it or not, a lot of people have the misconception that you need to bench press in a completely vertical plane. Bench press is actually the 1-big-3 movement where you want the bar to deviate a little bit, because in order to keep that angle constant, right, the shoulder, when I say this angle, I'll just be super explicit, right, like the angle of my torso relative to my bicep and tricep, right, relative to my arm, you want that angle to be constant. In order to do that, the bar actually has to follow a little bit of a curved path where the point it touches on your chest, it's actually going to, on the ascent, come a little bit up towards more towards your eyes and towards your face. So
Yeah. So to explain that in simpler and better words,
go for it. Go for it. Yeah, it was a little long-winded.
the bar should start at about your eye to the middle of your forehead, and it should come down to about middle to low pec. And when you push back up, it should finish with you looking about at the bar.
Right. Exactly. And
So
and one other thing too, Colin, with that is the kind of hand positioning and how that plays a role there. So like, depending on how wide your grip is, the wider your grip, the higher up on your pec the bar is going to touch. Versus if you're more close grip, like mine touches right around my sternum-ish, I would say, like kind of lower end of my pec, sternum. And that's going to be just heavily influenced by where you're choosing to grip the bar. Cool. I think that was pretty thorough on bench. I don't know. Is there anything else you wanted to add there, Colin? Or
I mean, the only thing I can think of would be like sticking points, but
sticking points?
I don't think it's really.
Yeah, similar concept to the deadlift to the squat with those, and also to the deadlift. But like if you have a sticking point, right? Like if you're weak off your chest, then doing like a pause rep would be good. If you're struggling with the lockout, then doing like I'm
Floor
blanking
bench.
on the variation. What was that?
Floor bench. So like you bench like laying on the floor.
Exactly, a floor press, or like I was thinking of like a block press, or even like just like a strict like a lockout where you have safety set up and you just bench off the safeties. There's a lot of different ways you can train it, but yeah, similar concepts apply where you can train those weak points really explicitly. Another thing too is if your triceps are weaker, you can do more close grip. If your pecs and front delts are a little weaker, you can do more wide grip in order to kind of address those deficiencies. Cool. Let's move on to the deadlift then. So this is my personal favorite of the big 3. Colin, I think is your favorite as well, or is one of your favorite?
I love deadlifting.
Deadlift's your favorite? Good.
Such an ego lift. My favorite ego lift. Boost the fuck out of my
it's a lot
ego.
of fun. Yeah. Deadlift's a lot of fun.
This is something so manly about just picking something very heavy up off the ground.
Just hoisting some heavy weight. Just absolutely hoisting it. Absolutely.
Yeah, just absolutely manhandling this damn
100%,
bar with
100%.
that much weight loaded on it. So egotistical.
For sure, man. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, for deadlift, for most people, the reason I always say that, I guess, for those of you listening, right? Deadlift is probably for pretty much everybody. Not maybe some people squat a little bit more than the deadlift, but for most people, deadlift is going to be your heaviest movement of these 3 that you can do, and probably one of the heaviest you can do at the gym, other than maybe like a heavy leg press or something like that. But with the deadlift, the big thing is just making sure your technique is right, because deadlift is one where if your technique is incorrect, it is easy to hurt yourself. So it's important we kind of spend some time going into that. First thing I think I see newbies struggle with all the time with this is the bar positioning relative to their foot. Like most people are a little, they don't realize that you should start with the bar tucked in, like relatively close to your shin, maybe even touching. It depends a little bit on your anatomy, but maybe even potentially touching your shin. And the reason for that is because, right, you want the bar to start roughly right over that midfoot-ish. Reason being, if you're starting over your midfoot, that's going to allow it to just ascend on that same vertical plane that we talked about with squat. It's the same one for deadlift. You want the bar to not do any forward or backward motion. As you can imagine, if you're pulling like 4, 5, 6, 700 pounds, you don't want the bar, any like little added motion there is going to be inefficient, right? So you want the bar to start over that midfoot point and just kind of ride that plane up and down. So a lot of people start with the bar, like in front of their toes or something, which is going to be incorrect, because you're gonna have to pull the bar back closer to your body then, and it's gonna lose the momentum. The grip for the bar, it really depends on like, whether you're using straps, whether you want to do double overhand. There's like hook grip is another way that I've never tried.
It
Yeah,
Hook
for
grip hurts your
yeah,
thumbs
I
really
haven't.
bad.
I can't say I recommend hook grip. But what I do recommend for people, probably the way that you're going to be the strongest, assuming you're not using straps. If you are using straps, you can kind of just go double overhand and grip it like normal. The way you're probably going to be strongest if you don't have straps and you're just using chalk is like a flip grip. So probably your dominant hand will be normal, your opposite hand will be flipped upwards, and the kind of position you should be grabbing it. Your hand should basically just extend, or your arm should basically just be extending straight down. So it depends a little on your shoulder width, but basically wherever that kind of puts you on the bar, that's roughly where you should be gripping.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of keeping your arm strength, the cue that I learned that works the best is to flex your triceps. So
Yep.
your upper body should practically be one long chain that does not move or bend. And so
Yes.
when your triceps are flexed, your arms are forced to be straight and locked out. And
Yep.
once you break that, you're no longer flexing them. So
Yeah.
keeping them
Exactly.
flexed straight is a lot easier to keep that one shorter range of motion to go with.
Exactly. And that's the name of the game with deadlift is you want to like make the range of motion as short as possible and make it as efficient as possible, because like any like deadlift, like I said, is one where it's really unforgiving. If you're like a little bit off on this, it's like you're just not going to be able to get the weight off the ground. So making sure your setup is done properly is super important. Other things with the setup that really matter are like bracing and then slack pulling. So bracing is the same as we talked about on squat. You want to make sure you're breathing in, your core is braced, and you're filling up that Coke can with Coke, so that you can really, so that your body is basically just as stiff and rigid as possible when you're trying to pull this heavy weight. But the bigger thing on deadlift that I think is important to understand is the slack pull. And so the slack pull, what is the slack pull, right? The bar, if you just have the bar sitting there, if you just go and just pull down and just yank it, right? You're not really like you're going to be putting yourself in a position where you could get injured. What you want to do, the bar is going to naturally bend a little bit, right? Like that's just how it is. It's going to bend a little bit before you can pick it up off the ground, at least with your heavier weights that you're going to be working with. So uh, allowing the bar to bend and then starting the pull is kind of how I think about it, right? Where you pull that slack. So like that's what I mean when I say pulling the slack. You want to pull the slack out to the point where the bar is fully bent and like ready to start actually moving off the ground before you start the actual movement. And there's a few different ways of doing this. There's a few different kind of techniques. It depends on maybe if you're doing sumo or conventional. But the biggest thing is you want to make sure, like ideally you should hear almost like a little click before you actually start like really pulling hard to get the bar off the ground. So what that'll kind of look like is you kind of get set up in your starting position, and then you kind of, it's almost like you engage your lats, you kind of stand up a little bit, you really brace your core hard, and then from there it's like, okay, now it's actually go time. And another good kind of thing you can use to check for this is with your lighter weights, with your warm-up weights. If you're doing this properly, you should see the bar actually move off the ground a little bit slightly with your warm-up, maybe up to about like 50% of your max. You'll probably see this happening, where the bar will actually move off the ground. And then that's a good signal that you're pulling the slack correctly. You know what I'm saying, Colin?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
another thing for deadlift is the
yeah.
finishing. Whenever I notice like people like if
Yes.
they're going for a heavy single or they're at a heavy weight, when they go
Yeah.
past their knee, they always want to tend to just lean back to lock out the rep. When in reality, the farther you go away from that bar, the more that bar has to travel. And one of the
Yep.
biggest
Same
cues I
thing.
learned, the biggest cue I learned, and this one surprisingly isn't from that waist coach that taught me the other weird stuff.
Yeah.
This is from Matt Moore. He said that once it
Yeah.
gets past your knees, to pretend like you're going to fuck the bar, and you want to bring, you want to, you
That's
want to, you want to bring your hips to
good.
the bar,
We
like
gotta get
the
Matt on this podcast soon, man.
God. So,
That's
yeah,
funny.
like you ultimately want to fuck the bar. You want to bring your hips to the bar
Yeah.
in that kind of position. And
Right.
so that will in turn, you squeeze your glutes, you push your hips forward, and that will help you, have a shorter range of motion and help you lock out and help you not, throw out a back by trying to
Yeah.
lean back with it.
100%. Yeah. And I think this is what you mean too when you say leaning back. You don't want to once you've locked out the bar, you don't want to over lock out the bar. Like, you don't want to extend to the point where, you're actually go past a neutral spine position. Um, if you do that, you're basically just going to kind of set yourself up for injury, especially if you're pulling, a considerable amount of weight on there. So make sure, lock it out fully, but don't go past that full lockout point either.
Yeah.
Cool. I think anything else on Dell? I think those are most of the main points. I think we covered that pretty clearly and efficiently. What do you think, Colin?
Yeah. I think we've hit about every major pain point of all three.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And with deadlift specifically, too, guys, because I know some of you probably pull conventional. I pull conventional. Colin, I think you pull sumo. I've played around with sumo a little bit. These cues can be applied kind of to either scenario, whether you want to pull conventional or pull sumo. There's not really a right or wrong way to do that with deadlift, in my opinion. It's just more a matter of personal preference and kind of how you want to do it. But very cool, very cool. Maybe we talk a little bit now about just kind of how we program these in. What do you think, Colin?
Yeah. I think we
Cool.
definitely talk about programming for these.
Yeah. So let's just kind of I'm just gonna kind of take the perspective of a beginner lifter here. If you're more advanced, it's gonna be probably tough for Colin, for you or I to give you a specific recommendation as far as what you need to be doing, because it's gonna really probably depend more on your goals and what you're trying to achieve with it. But let's just say you're new to the big three, and you're trying to build consistency and just kind of get the movements down, build up some strength, build some muscle, and just really kind of get into these movements for the first time. The kind of most simple approach that I usually take with my clients is just keeping the sets and reps constant week to week. Typically, I'll just do a 3x5, or maybe if somebody wants a little bit more of a hypertrophy focus, I'll go higher, like a 3x6 to 8 set scheme. But typically, just keeping it nice and easy with the progressions. You don't need to be doing I'm sure if you guys are on Instagram a lot, especially, you probably will see crazy squat and deadlift variations, like pause deadlifts, or maybe squat, reverse banded squats, or SSB, safety squat bar squats, and all this crazy Hatfield squat, all this crazy stuff. You don't need to be doing any of that stuff at the beginning. All you need to be doing is just mastering the basics of the movement, and then you can kind of go from there. So I really think 3x5 is good. You work in three heavy sets a week, and then you just try to progress the weight a little bit each week, 5 to 10 pounds. Keep going up until you can't really do that anymore, and that's going to be the way. That's going to be the way that I do it for pretty much all these. Deadlift is maybe a little bit of an exception, but we'll talk about that one in a sec, I guess. Colin, do you kind of program these similarly for your clients, or?
Yeah. I mean, especially for bench and squat, I'll
Yeah.
program typically, since I work with more hypertrophy people and people wanting to
Yeah.
build muscle, I'll
Yep.
do a lot more of a 3x6 to 8. And,
Sure.
I don't want to mess with percentages. I don't want them
Yeah.
to, try to figure out 75, 80%
Yep.
all during their workout. So I'll do 6x8 or at an RPE, so rate of perceived exertion, at about an 8 to an 8.5. And
Yeah.
if they hit 8 reps of it, we're going to go up 5 pounds. If they don't hit 6, go
Sure.
down. If they hit 6 or 7, there's a sweet spot. Do that to the next set.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
so eventually, it's very simple to understand,
Yep.
very easy, as long as you know how heavy you can go, or as
Yeah.
long as you know what it feels like, then we are able to easily build the muscle off just doing the 6x8 with that.
100%. Yeah. 100%. I think the thing with squats and with just squat and bench and just lifts in general is you always want to be making sure you're training to or near to failure, because if you're not doing that, you're not going to be stimulating the muscle and allowing it to grow in the way that it should. So that's why I say, when you're doing these, you should be trying to push the weight up a little bit each week if you can. At a certain point, you're no longer going to be able to do that, and that's kind of when you graduate from beginner status. But early on, man, you can add 10 pounds a week. You can go from squatting the bar to squatting 135 in 9 weeks if you do that. So which is quite a bit of progression. That's almost 3x the weight. So my point is, whether you want to do, whether you want to do a higher volume or lower volume approach, just making sure that you're taking the sets, the volume that you are doing, and making it quality volume, training to failure.
I mean, I know especially you're going to see, Jamal Browning, one of the best powerlifters in the world. He's not doing that many reps
Yeah,
simply because, towards his goals, he does
yeah,
not need to be able to, rep out
yeah,
8, 9 reps. He just needs to do that one heavy single.
yeah.
Versus,
That's
if you look
crazy.
at Chris Bumstead, you're going to see him do a lot more
Yeah,
reps simply because of their goals and
that's
ultimately
great.
how they have to train to be able to do what they do.
Yeah,
And, I hate to say
yeah,
it, none of us are either one of them two, and whoever's listening
sure.
more than likely aren't you two either. So
Sure, sure,
it's
sure.
it's going to be different person to person, and what
Yeah,
is going to be best for you is what you're going to figure out, not what you see someone do on Instagram.
yeah, 100%, 100%. Those are both great examples, by the way. For those that don't know, Jamal Browner, power lifter, Chris Bumstead, bodybuilder, two of the best at what they do in the game right now. So Jamal Browner, I've seen some crazy deadlift videos from him of him deadlifting
Like a that
1,100 pounds. So
dude, he's just casually deadlifting a car. Like,
yeah, I'm like, this is insane. Or
yeah,
doing, I've seen him do like over 1,000 pounds for reps, which is pretty insane. But um,
what?
regardless, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Anyway,
that's years of
yeah,
perfection on it.
yeah, yeah. Exactly. Years for sure. So the other thing with deadlift that I was going to say specifically with that movement is that tends to be the most taxing of these three movements. So you can reduce the volume a little bit on those, especially like if you're trying to do like a 3x5 type of split and you find that you're struggling to recover week to week from those in time, or if you find that like, you're able to recover by the next deadlift day, but like maybe like by the time you go to squat, it's like your back is sore and it's impacting your squat performance. I tend to like to dial down the volume on deadlift a little more, but just because the intensity is naturally so high already. I tend to like to dial down the volume a little bit more on those, especially as you get more. And this is like as a beginner, you could probably still get away with like a 3x5 or maybe even more volume, where they're all like actually hard sets. But as you get stronger and stronger, that is one where you got to be a little bit smarter about how you program it. And honestly, like once you get to the point where you're more in the intermediate or advanced category, like when I train deadlift, I'll do like if I work up to a heavy single, for example, right? If I'm just working up to one rep, like that is going to be that alone, the one rep itself and the process of warming up to it is going to be plenty sufficient to get me a good training stimulus for that day. I don't need to be doing like sets of 5 after that. So yeah, that's basically deadlift. Just a little kind of caveat point with that.
Yeah, I mean, especially for the deadlift, since you're more likely to get injured doing it compared to most other compound lifts. I don't program it as often for clients. So most of them
Yeah,
aren't deadlifting weekly. If they
yeah,
want to, that's fine. But I mean, I'm going to make sure their form's great at a
yeah,
heavyweight and at a lightweight,
yeah,
and that everything they're going to do is going to be perfect throughout, and we're not going to, destroy their back. So the next day they
hundred
can't
percent.
squat or they can't do anything that is going to involve them being
Yeah,
sore or hurting themselves eventually.
I'm with you. I'm with you. Yeah, with deadlift, 100%. Like that's one where I will be a bit more cautious about programming it for anyone and everyone as well. Versus like squat and bench, I think most people can do those healthily and be okay with them. But deadlift is one where definitely getting a video. Like I'll go through my clients, I'll have them take a video of that one normally, and having them do that and send that will essentially just make sure that their technique is right. Or even like if they're not necessarily, if their goal isn't necessarily just brute strength, and if it's more aesthetics or hypertrophy, like sometimes I won't even program them at all for clients. So it really depends.
I mean, it's person to person. A lot of people don't want to take that risk, so
Yep, I
nothing
agree.
wrong with that. I mean,
I
I
agree
hardly ever deadlift anymore just because it's not going to suit my goals and what I'm looking for.
for sure. Yeah, it makes
But,
sense.
picking up some heavy weight is still pretty,
It is
egotistical.
fun.
So
It
I,
is
I
fun.
also do it every now and then just to boost myself.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I don't blame you. I'm the same. I'm the same. But anyway, guys, I hope everyone listening enjoyed this and got some good value out of it. And yeah, hopefully now you guys know how you can program the squat, bench, and deadlift into your workout routine as well. Thanks for listening, guys.